You know that feeling when you're a teenager, trying on different versions of yourself? Like one day you're going to be a musician, and the next you're dead set on being a scientist. Well, that whole intense period of questioning and exploring is one of the most important journeys we ever take. So today, we're going to dive deep into the psychology of it all to figure out, how we figure out who we are.
I mean, it really all comes down to this one simple but absolutely massive question. During our teen years, our brains literally rewire themselves to be able to think abstractly, and for the first time ever, we can consciously ask this and really search for an answer. This quest, it's the main event of adolescence, and lucky for us, there's a fascinating roadmap to help us understand it.
So here's our plan. We'll kick things off with a psychologist who basically put identity on the map. Then we'll get into the 4 different paths we can take on this journey. We'll see how it all changes over time, what role gender plays, and finally, we'll talk about why getting this right is just so incredibly important for our lives.
To really get identity, you have to start with one guy, Erik Erikson. He was, without a doubt, the most influential thinker on this whole topic, and his big idea was that building an identity wasn't just something that happens inside your head. Nope. He said it was psychosocial, kind of like a dance between your inner world and the society you're a part of.
Erikson called the end goal of all this work ego identity. And what's so cool about his definition is that it's not just some abstract intellectual thing. He described it as a feeling, like a deep sense of being at home in your own skin, knowing where you're headed, and trusting that the people who matter most will see and recognize the real you.
So Erikson basically framed the teenage years as this big tug of war. On one side, you have identity achievement. That's where you take all the things you learned as a kid, all your experiences, and you mash them all together into something new and totally unique to you. But on the other side, there's role confusion, and that's that feeling of being totally adrift, just uncertain about what you believe, what you want, and where you even fit in.
So how do you get from the certainty of being a kid to having a solid adult identity? Well, Erikson came up with this brilliant idea of a middle step, the psychosocial moratorium. Honestly, you can just think of it as a developmental timeout. It's this safe period where society kind of gives you a pass to try on different hats. Experiment with different jobs, beliefs, relationships, all without the crazy pressure of having to commit forever. It's not about being lost, it's about active exploration.
All right, so Erikson gave us the big picture, but another psychologist, James Marcia, came along and gave us a super practical way to see it all in action. He took Erikson's theory and built a framework to show the different styles or paths that teens take to figure this stuff out. And it all starts with 2 really simple ideas.
Marcia's whole model is built on just 2 things. First, have you done any exploration? Now, he called this a crisis, but don't let that word scare you. It doesn't mean a catastrophe. It just means a period where you're actively asking questions and trying to make decisions. And second, have you made a commitment, which is just making a real personal investment in something, whether it's a career, a belief system, or your values.
And get this, by combining those 2 things, exploration and commitment, Marcia created this amazing framework. By simply asking, has this person explored their options? And have they made a commitment? You get 4 unique paths, or what he called identity statuses. Let's break down exactly what they look like.
First up, we have the one that's considered the ideal outcome, identity achievement. These are the people who've gone through that period of exploration, they've asked the hard questions, they've done the work, and they've come out on the other side with commitments that are truly their own. They have a clear, personal sense of direction. Next is identity moratorium. And these folks are right in the thick of it. They are actively exploring, questioning everything, and wrestling with their choices. The crisis is happening right now, which means their commitments are still pretty vague. But this isn't a bad thing at all. This is the searching phase, the in-progress part of building who you are.
Then we've got identity foreclosure. Now this one's really interesting. These are people who have made firm commitments, but they skip the whole exploration part. A classic example is the person who decides to become a doctor just because their parents are doctors, without ever really asking if that's what they truly want. On the surface, they seem to have it all together, but the identity isn't really their own. And finally, there's identity diffusion. This is when there's a lack of both exploration and commitment. A person in diffusion isn't really wrestling with the big identity questions and doesn't have a firm direction. They might seem kind of carefree, but this status is often tied to that feeling of just being adrift, really disconnected from your own future.
Now, it is so tempting to look at these 4 statuses like they're fixed boxes you get put into. But real life is way more dynamic than that. Research shows we don't just pick a status and stay there forever. Our sense of identity actually ebbs and flows as we grow up. And this timeline really shows the journey. Around ages 12 to 15, as you start questioning everything your parents taught you, that feeling of confusion totally spikes. That's normal. But then, from about 15 to 23, that's the sweet spot where a solid sense of self usually starts to form. Confusion goes down, and what researchers call synthesis goes up. But the story's not over. Notice there's even a slight dip again around 23 to 25, as a whole new set of adult challenges pop up.
So, does this whole journey look the same for everyone? Well, not quite. Research has actually found some subtle but really important differences in how boys and girls tend to navigate this whole identity quest, especially when it comes to the timing of it all.
It's a pretty fascinating pattern, actually. Girls often report feeling more confused in early adolescence, and that might be because they start the whole exploration process a bit earlier. Then, in the middle of the teen years, you see this flip. Girls' sense of a solid identity starts to climb, right as boys might be hitting their peak of confusion. But by the time they reach their late teens, those differences pretty much level out as everyone starts to find their footing.
So we've talked a lot about how identity gets formed. But what about the why? Why is this process so incredibly important? Well, the answer is that our sense of self is deeply, deeply connected to our overall health and personality.
And here is the bottom line. Why this matters so much, the link to mental health is undeniable. Having a clear, solid identity literally acts as a protective shield for your well-being. But on the flip side, when that identity confusion hangs around for too long without being resolved, it becomes one of the strongest predictors of depressive symptoms. This is serious stuff.
And you could even see different personality traits that tend to go with each status. People in achievement and moratorium, the ones who've explored or are exploring, they usually have higher self-esteem and are more independent. Then you have foreclosure. They might show less anxiety, but it's often because they're just following rules and really need that external validation. And finally, people in diffusion often struggle more with lower self-esteem and tend to have a more passive, go-with-the-flow approach to life.
But if there is one single thing to remember from all of this, it's that this process never, ever truly ends. James Marcia himself said it perfectly. Identity is dynamic, not static. We are always adding new pieces and getting rid of old ones that don't fit anymore. It's a living, breathing part of who we are.
So, at the end of the day, your identity isn't some hidden treasure you're supposed to find one day. It's something you actively build. It's a story that you are constantly writing and revising. It's a construction project that actually continues for your entire life.
And that leaves us with one final thought to reflect on. It doesn't matter if you're 15, 25, or 55. This process keeps going. So the question for you is, what parts of your identity, your values, your passions, your commitments are you actively building right now?